In the modern world, New Year's Day is simply a celebration of changing calendar pages, fireworks, and chasing discounts. But imagine thousands of years ago, before smartphones, electric heaters, and artificial lights. For ancient people, winter was not just a cold season, but a terrifying period when the struggle for survival intensified, nature seemingly died, and darkness slowly engulfed the world. It was in the midst of this darkness, on December 21st, that the foundation of one of humanity's oldest and most universal celebrations was laid, the winter solstice. December 21st is the shortest day and longest night of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. For ancient societies, this date was the critical moment when the sun stopped in its journey across the sky and decided to return. For agricultural societies, the sun was life itself. If the sun didn't return, crops wouldn't grow, animals wouldn't reproduce, and humanity would starve to death. Therefore, the lengthening of days again after December 21st was celebrated as the victory of the sun. People didn't sleep on that longest night. They lit enormous bonfires to witness the sun's rebirth. These fires weren't just for warmth, but to ward off dark spirits in the sky and guide the sun.
Still, we can see the most tangible traces of this sacredness in massive stone structures today. From Stonehenge in England to the Newgrange Temple in Ireland, these ancient engineering marvels are aligned to receive the first rays of the winter solstice sun precisely at their center. For the people of that era, this wasn't a hobby, but a matter of survival. They had to read the calendar correctly to be sure that spring would come. For them, New Year's Day was the moment when nature promised its reawakening. This is where the evergreen plants, pine, mistletoe, that underlie the tradition of decorating Christmas trees come into play. While every other tree outside shed its leaves and looked dead, the pine tree remaining green was proof that life was still out there somewhere and that spring would surely come. Winter solstice celebrations weren't just a Hello New Year message. They were a promise made on that fine line between life and death. In ancient Egypt, the healing of the god Ra. In Northern Europe, Odin's hunting parties. In Rome, the honoring of Saturn. They all essentially said the same thing. No matter how long the darkness lasts, light will surely prevail. As we count down to the end of the year on December 31st, we are unknowingly carrying on the legacy of our fearful yet hopeful ancient ancestors from thousands of years ago. They lit their torches to help the sun. We light our way to a new beginning.
When Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, the people refused to abandon this deeply rooted festival. When the Church Fathers realized they couldn't detach the people from this custom, they made a strategic decision. They baptized the exuberant spirit and history of Saturnalia by linking it to the birth of Jesus Christ. December 25th was designated as Christmas because it coincided with both the end of Saturnalia and the birth of the sun god. Thus, the Romans continued to give gifts, light candles, and set up grand feasts. They simply changed the name and purpose of the celebration. Saturnalia didn't die, it simply changed form, blending into the modern world's Happy New Year greetings. The story of the winter solstice is not just a legacy of the Western world or Rome. This ancient cycle is one of the cornerstones of Turkish mythology and culture. According to ancient Turkish belief, there is a huge tree at the very center of the earth that connects the world to the sky. Akçam tree, the tree of life. This tree represented the continuity of life in the cosmology of the Turks. Every year on December 21, that is, at that critical moment when the nights are longest and darkness surrounds the world, Turks believed that a great cosmic war was taking place. This was the fight between day and night, and the victory would always be the sun, that is, the day. The festival celebrating this victory was called Nardugan.
The word Nar meant sun, and Dugan meant rising, so Nardugan meant rising sun. Turks would celebrate the victory of the sun and the beginning of the days getting longer by expressing their gratitude to god Ulgan. Ulgan was a great figure who lived on the highest floor of the sky and was the protector of goodness and light. People would go under the white pine tree to thank Ulgan for allowing the sun to return during the harshest period of winter, because white pine was the only symbol of immortality and resistance with its evergreen structure that does not shed its leaves in winter. During Nardugan celebrations, colorful fabrics, cloths, and ribbons were tied to the branches of the white pine tree. These cloths represented wishes and prayers from god Ulgan. Gifts offered to God were left under the tree. This ritual is one of the oldest forms of how people around the world today decorate Christmas trees and wrap gifts under them. For the Turks at that time, this was not an ornament, but a result of an unshakable belief that nature would come to life and a deep bond with nature. People wore their best clothes, families came together, and special meals and fruits were prepared at home.
In the marble streets of ancient Rome, life came to a complete standstill between December 17th and 23rd each year, giving way to uncontrollable chaos. This was the Saturnalia festival, held in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. Many of the Christmas and New Year traditions we celebrate today, from gift-giving and feasts to illuminations and the suspension of social rules, have their roots in this Roman festival. However, Saturnalia had far stricter, louder, and more surprising rules than today's celebrations. The most interesting aspect of Saturnalia was the complete reversal of Rome's rigid hierarchy. During the festival, slaves and masters switched roles. Masters prepared food for and served their slaves. This was, according to Roman belief, a return to that lost golden age when Saturn reigned, a time when everyone was equal and the land yielded its own produce. In those days, people would remove their formal attire, the toga, and wear more casual clothes called synthesis and conical hats or pileus, symbolizing freedom. The streets would constantly echo with cries of "Io Saturnalia! Long live Saturnalia!" and all businesses, schools, and courts would be closed.
One of the most important rituals of this period was gift-giving. People would exchange wax candles, ciri, and small clay figurines called sigillaria. The candles symbolized the return of light during the darkest days of winter, while the small figurines became a symbolic and harmless reflection of the human sacrifice rituals practiced in the much darker periods of antiquity. The ancestors of the packages left under the trees on Christmas morning today are precisely these humble gifts that the Romans offered each other. Houses were decorated with green branches and fruit, and tables were never empty during the enormous feasts that lasted for days. However, Saturnalia was not just about food and entertainment. It was also a period of gambling and risk. Gambling, normally forbidden, was permitted during this week. Each household would choose a prince of Saturnalia, Saturnalicus princeps. Usually the person of the lowest status in the house or a child would receive this title and entertain everyone by issuing nonsensical orders throughout the week. This tradition was essentially a temporary dissolution of seriousness and authority. The Romans believed that allowing chaos for a while ensured that society remained more orderly for the rest of the time.
When Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, the people refused to abandon this deeply rooted festival. When the Church Fathers realized they couldn't detach the people from this custom, they made a strategic decision. They baptized the exuberant spirit and history of Saturnalia by linking it to the birth of Jesus Christ. December 25th was designated as Christmas because it coincided with both the end of Saturnalia and the birth of the sun god. Thus, the Romans continued to give gifts, light candles, and set up grand feasts. They simply changed the name and purpose of the celebration. Saturnalia didn't die, it simply changed form, blending into the modern world's Happy New Year greetings. The story of the winter solstice is not just a legacy of the Western world or Rome. This ancient cycle is one of the cornerstones of Turkish mythology and culture. According to ancient Turkish belief, there is a huge tree at the very center of the earth that connects the world to the sky. Akçam tree, the tree of life. This tree represented the continuity of life in the cosmology of the Turks. Every year on December 21, that is, at that critical moment when the nights are longest and darkness surrounds the world, Turks believed that a great cosmic war was taking place. This was the fight between day and night, and the victory would always be the sun, that is, the day. The festival celebrating this victory was called Nardugan.
According to Mithraic belief, this god was born from a rock and brought light to the world by fighting darkness. Roman legions carried cult of this sun god wherever they went. December 25th was the first day after the winter solstice when the days visibly began to lengthen. For the Romans, this was the moment when the sun conquered darkness, when it was reborn. Mithraic temples, Mithraeums, were usually built underground in dark cave-like spaces. The lighting of the lamp at the end of ceremonies held in these dark places symbolized the rebirth of the sun. These celebrations, held on December 25th, involved sacrifices, grand feasts, and the salutation of the Prince of Light. So how did the birthday of a Persian Roman god become the birthday of Jesus Christ? Historically, the Bible does not give a precise date for Jesus' birth. There was great debate over this date in the early centuries of Christianity. However, in the 4th century, when Christianity became the official religion of Rome during the reign of Emperor Constantine, the Church faced a strategic problem. The people did not abandon celebrating the invincible sun on December 25th. With the streets of Rome overflowing with festivities on that day, spreading the new religion was difficult. The Church Fathers came up with a brilliant solution. Since the people wanted to celebrate the birth of a Savior and a light on December 25th, this light should no longer be Mithra, but Jesus. December 25th was officially declared the birthday of Jesus, Christmas. Thus, the invincible sun of the pagan world merged with the light of the world of the Christian world. People continued to celebrate on the same day, traditions largely remained the same, only the name of the worshipped figure changed. This was one of the most successful cultural integrations in history. Mithra's legacy still lives on in Christmas celebrations today. The candles lit in the dark, the light decorations, and the theme of that Savior arriving in the middle of winter carry the spirit of the Roman soldiers who prayed to Mithra in underground caves thousands of years ago. December 25th is in fact a millennia-old celebration of an astronomical fact, the return of the sun. Whether you call it Mithra or something else, there was only one thing celebrated that day: the defeat of darkness and the victory of the sun, the enormous star that makes life possible.
Another interesting character of Nardugan is Ayaz-Ata. This legendary figure, who protects people in cold weather and secretly helps those in need, bears surprising similarities with the Santa Claus character we know today. Ayaz-Ata was usually depicted as a wise old man who appeared in the freezing cold of winter and walked around with his daughter, or assistant, Snow Girl. He was a symbol that distributed hope and joy to the society to overcome the difficulties brought by winter. As Turkic tribes migrated and dispersed to different geographies, this Akpine tree and Ayaz-Ata culture were carried with them, and over time they were blended with the winter rituals of other cultures. When Christianity began to spread in Europe, the Church initially rejected this tree-decorating tradition and saw it as paganism. However, these deep-rooted customs were too strong to be erased from the minds of the people. Eventually, these traditions merged with Scandinavian and Germanic customs to become central to modern Christmas celebrations. Someone who makes a wish in front of a pine tree today actually carries the energy of those ancient Turks who tied cloth to a pine tree thousands of years ago in the endless steppes of Central Asia. Nardugan is our oldest and most beloved story of the light that rises after darkness and how a spring is hidden at the end of every winter.
Long before the cheerful Christmas carols and colorful lights of today, a completely different atmosphere prevailed in the freezing darkness of Northern Europe. For the Scandinavian and Germanic peoples, the darkest time of winter was a sacred period called Yule or Yule. This was not just a calendar change, but a time when supernatural beings, ghosts, and gods were closest to our world, when the veil thinned. At the very heart of Yule was a majestic and terrifying one-eyed figure, Odin, the father of the gods. During Yule, Odin would mount his eight-legged flying horse, Sleipnir, and lead his army of spirits on a wild hunt in the sky. The roaring sound of storms raging in the sky was a sign of Odin's passing. Scandinavian children would fill Sleipnir's boots with straw and carrots and leave them by the fireplace. In return for this kindness, Odin would empty the boots and leave gifts or sweets in their place. Today, the tradition of children hanging stockings in fireplaces on Christmas Eve and putting food for reindeer inside is directly inherited from this ancient Viking ritual. Odin's long white beard, cloak, and flying horse were the first drafts of the Santa Claus figure that would appear centuries later.
Because Nicholas lived in the Mediterranean region, he wasn't depicted in furs or thick red coats in his time. He was a brave clergyman walking under the Lycian sun in a thin bishop's robe, praying for the salvation of sailors from storms, and standing before the emperor to rescue unjustly imprisoned individuals. He was so beloved among sailors that the name Saint Nicholas became a protective symbol in every port from the Mediterranean to Russia. Even today, the Church of Saint Nicholas in Demre continues to preserve the atmosphere in which he once walked and addressed his people. So, how did this Mediterranean bishop transform into a winter hero? December 6th, the day of Nicholas's death, began to be celebrated in medieval Europe as a major holiday where gifts were given to children. Over time, this tradition blended with the winter solstice and Yule holidays we just discussed. As the geography changed, Nicholas's thin robe was replaced with thick furs to withstand the cold of the north. The sailing ships of the Mediterranean gave way to flying reindeer. But the essence of the story, his mission to bring hope to the homeless and children, never changed.
Saint Nicholas was not just a religious figure, but one of the first representatives of Anatolia's humanist spirit. He believed in the sanctity of sharing, not ownership. Today, while the whole world chases after Santa Claus, they are actually celebrating the legacy of that kind-hearted man who walked the dusty roads of Antalya and rested in the shade of olive trees. Santa Claus's home is not the North Pole, but the warm streets of Demre. He did not emerge from the snow, but from the fertile lands of Anatolia to embrace the whole world. Billions of children worldwide wonder every Christmas Eve how Santa Claus manages to squeeze through those narrow chimneys and why he chooses this particular route. While this might seem like a fun winter fairy tale today, its origins lie in a dramatic story of social solidarity that took place in Antalya. During the time when St. Nicholas was bishop, the people of Myra, Demre, lived in great poverty. According to legend, an old nobleman living in the city had lost his fortune and could no longer provide dowries for his 3 daughters. Due to the strict social rules of the time, girls without dowries could not marry and even faced the risk of being sold into slavery. As the father, in desperation, considered selling his daughters, St. Nicholas heard of the situation.
Nicholas didn't want to shame the family while helping them, because in those days, openly giving money to an honorable person meant humiliating them in society. Therefore, one midnight, Nicholas secretly went to the family's house. However, the doors were locked. Nicholas threw a bag full of gold through the open window. The next morning, the father, having found the gold, managed to marry off his eldest daughter. Nicholas decided to do the same for his other 2 daughters. However, on the 3rd night, the father waited awake to find out who this mysterious benefactor was. To avoid being caught, Nicholas this time used the chimney instead of the window. He dropped the bag of gold down the chimney. At this point, a very interesting detail is added to the story. The bag of gold that fell down the chimney landed inside a stocking that had been hung by the fireplace to dry. Today, the tradition of hanging stockings by the fireplace on Christmas Eve and leaving gifts inside them originated exactly 1,700 years ago from the chimney of that poor house in Antalya. Nicholas' secret act of kindness eventually became the foundation of the philosophy of gifts given without expecting anything in return. Those gold coins not only saved a family, but also started a chain of traditions that would last for thousands of years.
As this story spread by word of mouth in medieval Europe, the symbolic meaning of the chimney also began to change. The chimney was, for people of that era, the only open door between the outside world and the privacy of the home. It was seen as the entry point for spirits and sacred beings. When the figure of St. Nicholas reached the northern countries, that benevolent image of him entering through the chimney merged with local legends of spirits and fairies entering through chimneys to become what it is today. People, even when they locked their doors and went to sleep, awaited the new year with the hope of a miracle sneaking down the chimney. Even though modern homes today may lack fireplaces or chimneys, the belief that Santa Claus still chooses that route is actually a reminder of the immense kindness shown by St. Nicholas. It's a story of doing good without hurting the recipient, of secretly leaving a glimmer of hope in the darkness. That first bag of gold thrown down the chimney represents humanity's debt to one another, that invisible bridge between the rich and the poor. Therefore, Santa Claus entering through the chimney is not a technical necessity, but a sign of honor and kindness.
Although St. Nicholas is believed to live in the polar regions today, in ancient times he was first and foremost a maritime hero. As a bishop living on the coast of Lycia, Nicholas was intimately connected with the sea throughout his life. Myra was one of the most important stops for the giant ships carrying wheat from Egypt to Rome. Seafaring at that time was not the technologically advanced business it is today. It was a dangerous gamble where one faced death at any moment. In this stormy world, Nicholas became the only safe harbor for sailors, the only light illuminating their path in the dark waters. The most powerful legend that made him a global icon occurred during a sea voyage. Nicholas boarded a ship bound for the Holy Land, Jerusalem. During the voyage, a terrible storm broke out. As the waves threatened to engulf the ship, the sailors, in terror, pleaded with Nicholas for help. Nicholas calmly began to pray, and miraculously the storm subsided and the sea became calm. Legend has it that he even brought back to life a sailor who had fallen from the mast and died in the storm. After this event, Nicholas's fame spread throughout the Mediterranean.
Every sailor now began to pray, "May Saint Nicholas be with us," before setting sail.
This admiration for Saint Nicholas spread from the borders of Lycia, first to the heart of Byzantium, then to the ports of Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. Throughout the Middle Ages, sailors built churches in his name in every port they visited. Port cities, Amsterdam, Bari, Naples, Hamburg, declared Saint Nicholas their patron saint. Dutch sailors called him Sinterklaas. For them, Nicholas was not just a clergyman, but a legendary captain who calmed storms and miraculously supplied wheat to starving ships. When the Dutch migrated to America in the 17th century, to what is now New York, then called New Amsterdam, they took their most precious treasure with them, the belief in Saint Nicholas. Nicholas's role as the patron saint of sailors also fueled the image of him being everywhere and swift. For sailors, the faster the wind, the faster Nicholas's help arrived. His statues adorned the bows of ships, and his image was depicted on flags. Without this global spread, Nicola would probably have remained merely a local Anatolian saint. But sailors carried him from port to port, from continent to continent, becoming the greatest brand ambassadors in world history. Centuries before Nicholas soared through the sky with reindeer, he was actually gliding over the waves of the Mediterranean.
Today, Santa Claus's ability to travel the world in a single night is actually inherited from those endless journeys of sailors and Nicholas' ever-present speed. He set out from the warm port of Antalya and conquered the world on the shoulders of sailors. He was no longer just the hero of Myra, but the shared hero of all humanity. But this great fame would bring with it a dark ambition. Nicholas had become so valuable that even after his death he would not be left in peace. His tomb would be stolen in an international operation. Saint Nicholas was buried in a marble sarcophagus in his church in Myra, Demre, when he died in 343 AD. For centuries, his tomb was a stopping point for sailors and pilgrims from all over the world. However, by the 11th century, tensions were rising in Anatolia. The arrival of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia and the weakening of Byzantine power in the region created a golden opportunity for Italian merchants. In 1087, a group of daring sailors and merchants from Bari, Italy, landed on the shores of Demre to carry out one of the greatest holy robbery operations in history. The official pretext for the Italians was to protect the saint's bones from the Muslims. However, the real reason was entirely economic and political. At that time, there was fierce rivalry between port cities like Venice and Bari. Whichever city had a more sacred saint attracted all the wealthy pilgrims of Europe. The Bari sailors raided the church in Demre. They neutralized the priests guarding the church and smashed St. Nicholas's marble sarcophagus with sledgehammers. They hastily loaded the saint's bones onto their ships and sailed to Italy. While this event caused a great shock in the Christian world at the time, it was a tremendous victory for the people of Bari. Upon reaching Bari, a massive Basilica of San Nicola, was built for the bones. This abduction operation was so successful that Bari suddenly became one of the most important religious centers in Europe. But the story didn't end there. A few years later, the Venetians arrived in Demre. They stole the remaining small bone fragments from the sarcophagus and took them to Venice. Today, DNA and anthropological tests confirm that the bones in Bari and Venice belong to the same person, the old man who lived in Antalya.
This event is the most critical turning point in the geographical westernization of the Santa Claus legend. Had Nicholas's bones remained in Demre, he would likely have been remembered as a local saint belonging to Orthodox and Eastern culture. However, the transfer of his bones to Italy, the heart of Europe, paved the way for his story to become a pop culture icon in Renaissance Europe, then in the Netherlands and throughout the Western world. Europeans embraced this saint, now on their own soil.
They gradually forgot his Mediterranean identity and began to reimagine him according to their own climates and cultures. Those who visit the empty sarcophagus in Antalya today can still see the marks of the sledgehammer on the marble. Those cracks are the traces of not just a tomb, but a legend being shattered and scattered across the world. Nicholas's bones were stolen, but his spirit and story had grown too big to be contained by any borders. While Italian merchants were in pursuit of gold and power, they unknowingly provided the greatest fuel for Santa Claus's global journey. Nicholas was no longer a bishop of Anatolia, but the miracle-working saint of Europe.
After St. Nicholas's remains were smuggled to Italy and his fame spread throughout Europe, the Dutch were the people who most embraced the figure and laid the foundations for today's Santa Claus image. In Dutch culture, Nicholas took the name Sinterklaas. However, this Sinterklaas was somewhat different from the pot-bellied, laughing Santa Claus we know today. He was still a serious bishop. He wore a magnificent red bishop's robe and a mitra hat representing his religious authority. He rode on a snow-white horse, wielding a staff. In Dutch tradition, Sinterklaas lived not in the North Pole, but in Spain, where he spent the rest of the year. Every year, in mid-November, he would arrive in the Netherlands by steamship. He was accompanied by assistants who kept track of whether children had behaved well throughout the year. Sinterklaas would ride his snow-white horse across the roofs of houses and listen in through chimneys. Children would put carrots and straw in the shoes of St. Nicholas's horse so it wouldn't get hungry. Remember, the same ritual as for Odin's Sleipnir. If the child was well behaved, sweets and gifts would be left in their shoes. If they were naughty, they would be warned by Zwarte Piet, the Black Pete.
In the modern world, Santa Claus brings gifts to well-behaved children, while naughty ones get nothing more than coal. However, in the ancient traditions of Central Europe, particularly Austria and Bavaria, the price of misbehavior is much higher than coal. This is where Krampus comes in. Krampus is Santa Claus's opposite, his shadow and his terrifying twin. In his half-goat, half-demon form, with his enormous horns, furry body, long red tongue hanging from his mouth, and jingling chains, he is the true nightmare of Christmas Eve. Krampus's origins lie in pre-Christian Germanic paganism. People believed that evil beings were out in the dark and harsh days of winter. Instead of eliminating this figure, the Church placed him alongside St. Nicholas as a punisher. According to the story, St. Nicholas and Krampus set out together on the night of December 5th, Krampusnacht. While Nicola gave sweets and toys to good children, Krampus frightened naughty children with birch branches, rooten, even, according to legend, throwing them into his basket and taking them to hell or dark forests.
The chains on Krampus symbolize his control by the church, or goodness. But the clanging of those chains, heard in the quiet streets of the villages, was the harshest disciplinary message given to children. The Krampus figure was a tool of culture of fear, used to maintain social order. The warning, "If you don't behave, Krampus will come," echoed in Central European homes for centuries. This represented a much rawer and more ancient emotion than the sterile and overly sweet Christmas image we know today. It was a lesson in survival and morality. Interestingly, in the early 20th century, the Krampus tradition was considered too wild and pagan, and attempts were made to ban it in Austria by the church and some political groups. Even printing Krampus postcards was deemed a crime. However, this dark figure has not been erased from the shadows of the human mind. From the 2000s onwards, people tired of the overly sugary version of popular culture rediscovered Krampus.
Today, Krampus walks, or Krampuslauf, are organized in many places from America to Japan. People take to the streets, wearing terrifying masks and jingling chains.
Krampus reminds us that where there is light, there is also shadow. Christmas is not only about being rewarded, but also about taking responsibility for one's actions. Just as St. Nicholas is merciful, Krampus is merciless. This is a reflection of the ancient world's belief in the balance of nature, good and evil, summer and winter, life and death. If one day you hear the sound of chains behind you while walking down a cold street at the beginning of December, be careful, buddy, because Krampus might still be out there somewhere looking for troublemakers. While Santa Claus and Krampus reigned in the streets, another authority resided within the hearths of homes and in the heart of the snowstorms: Perchta and Frau Holle. These two figures are the queens of winter in Germanic and Alpine mythology. They not only bring gifts, they are also the winter versions of the ancient Mother Nature figures who oversee discipline, cleanliness, and diligence. If Santa Claus is reward and Krampus is punishment, then Perchta and Frau Holle are justice itself.
Perchta, revered with a mixture of fear and respect, especially in alpine villages, was depicted with two different faces, sometimes as beautiful as an angel and dressed in white, and sometimes as ugly and old as a demon. Perchta traveled the world during those 12 holy nights between December 21st and January 6th. Her greatest obsession was diligence. She checked whether young girls were spinning wool and whether houses were clean. According to legend, she left silver coins for those who were diligent. However, those who were lazy or disobedient at the Christmas dinner would have their bellies slit open and stuffed with straw. This gruesome image was actually a metaphorical representation of how vital discipline was for survival in the harsh winter conditions. On the other hand, Frau Holle, Mother Hulda, whom we know from fairy tales, is the mistress of the sky and winter. This figure appearing in the Brothers Grimm's tales is actually a remnant of an ancient goddess. According to belief, when it snows on Earth, Frau Holle is actually shaking her bed in the sky. The feathers falling from her pillow fall to the world as snow. Like Perchta, Frau Holle likes to test. She appears to girls who have fallen into wells or gotten lost in the forest, giving them work. She rewards the kind and hard-working with gold, while covering the lazy and disrespectful with a tar, blackness that will never come off.
The greatest value these female figures add to the Santa Claus legend is domestic order and spiritual purity. They symbolize that winter is not just a festival celebrated outdoors, but also a time of introspection, purification, and preparation for the new year. Even today, in some parts of Germany and Austria, Perchtenlauf parades are held, where women wearing terrifying masks walk the streets. These masks are used to ward off the evil spirits of winter, just as nature sweeps away the dirt of winter to prepare for spring. Perchta and Frau Holle show us just how multifaceted the Santa Claus figure actually is. On one hand, a cheerful figure distributing gifts, and on the other, these mysterious women who inspect every speck of dust in the house and every ill intention in the heart. They remind us that winter is not just cold, but also a time for reckoning. If you follow a feather that falls from your pillow, or if you hear a knock on your door on a winter night, remember that it might not just be a gift, my friend.
When we think of Christmas today, we immediately think of cute deers. But in the deep history of Scandinavia, the real symbol of this holiday is a goat. The Yule goat, Jævlabukken, or Julebuk, is a very strange figure whose origins date back thousands of years to the legends of Thor, the god of thunder.
According to belief, Thor used to travel in the sky with his chariot pulled by two goats, Tangrisnir and Tanjnostra. For the Vikings, the goat represented both fertility and resistance to the hardships of winter. However, over time, this divine figure turned into Santa Claus's closest friend, and sometimes Santa Claus himself. During Christmas celebrations in Scandinavia during the Middle Ages and later, people dressed up as goats or made huge goat figures out of straw. This Yule goat was seen as a mysterious being who went from house to house delivering gifts. In fact, when the figure of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, reached these lands, it was initially thought that he personally brought gifts to children on the back of a goat. The reason why you see small straw goats tied with red ribbons in the corner of every house in Sweden and Norway today is that this thousands of years old Thor legend is a living legacy.
But the story of the Yule goat is not just a cute ornament. A giant straw goat has been built in Gavle, Sweden every year since 1966. The interesting and traditional part of the matter is that someone tries to burn this giant goat illegally every year. Although the city government has erected cameras and security guards to protect the goat, it has become a strange secret belief among the public that the burning of the goat completes the winter spirit of that year. This is a modern, somewhat humorous reflection of the sacrificial ceremonies performed in ancient times and the fires lit in winter. The Yule goat is a transitional form in the evolution of Santa Claus. Before the deers arrive, this goat is the figure that both frightens children and brings them hope in those freezing northern nights. This simple toy made of straw actually represents the fertility of the soil, the straw left after the harvest, and the promise that the sun will rise again in the middle of winter. If you see a little straw goat on the branch of a Christmas tree today, remember that it's not just an ornament, it carries within it the thunderous legacy of an entire Viking god, Thor.
When Santa's cheerful laughter reached the rugged cliffs of Iceland, he encountered a far older and more terrifying family that had reigned there for millennia. Grýla, the giant female monster and the darkest figure in Icelandic folklore, is the true horror of Christmas. Grýla is a monster who lives in a cave, is said to have outgrown 3 wives, and descends from the mountains with a giant sack to round up naughty children as Christmas approaches. But Grýla has a pet that is one of the strangest and most terrifying Christmas symbols in the world, the Yule cat, or Jólakotturinn. This cat is unlike any house cat you know. It's as big as a house, jet black, with eyes that blaze and claws as sharp as swords. But this cat has a very strange habit. It eats not naughty children, but those who don't wear new clothes. Yes, you heard right. According to Icelandic tradition, those who work hard all year spinning wool and acquire a new outfit, usually a wool sweater or socks, before Christmas, are safe. However, those who are too lazy to sew or buy new clothes become the Yule cat's dinner that night. This might sound like a silly fashion police story, but it has a harsh survival lesson behind it. In a region like Iceland, where winter is deadly, wool production and clothing making are a matter of life and death. Everyone must work together to prepare for winter, shearing the sheep and processing the wool. The Yule cat legend was a pedagogical tool that motivated or frightened children and adults to finish their winter preparations. If you didn't work, winter would catch you not just with the cold, but with its claws. Grýla also has 13 sons. They are called the Yule lads. They were once depicted as criminals or thieves, door-slamming, candle-stealing, sausage-eating types. But over time, these 13 brothers have become the Icelandic version of Santa Claus, now leaving little gifts in children's shoes.
Yet their mother Gryla and that giant cat are still there. Even today, Icelanders always give each other a piece of clothing as a Christmas gift because nobody wants to attract the giant cat's attention.
Today, the idea of Santa Claus entering through the chimney seems like a children's fairy tale we don't give much thought to, or even laugh at, finding it physically impossible. However, for people in antiquity, the chimney was the most mysterious, sacred, and at the same time the most frightening part of the house. In those cramped houses where walls protected you from the cold and wild animals, the chimney was the only opening to the sky. Therefore, the chimney was not just a channel for smoke to escape, it was considered a cosmic gateway through which the spirits of the dead, supernatural beings, and gods entered and exited the house. In pre-Christian European and Asian cultures, the hearth, where the fire burned, was the heart of the family and the dwelling place of the ancestors' spirits. According to belief, on those dark winter nights when the curtain was thin, the spirits outside used the chimney to enter the house. In Scandinavian mythology, the goddess Hertha would descend through the chimney during the Christmas season, bringing blessings to the family at the hearth. However, this passage wasn't always benevolent. Many cultures told stories of evil spirits, witches, and even demons entering through the chimney. People would hang protective amulets above the hearth and perform special rituals around the chimney to keep this passage under control.
When the legend of St. Nicholas reached Europe, the famous story of throwing gold down the chimney was perfectly blended with this ancient belief. The fear of supernatural beings coming down the chimney in people's minds was transformed into the joy of sacred gifts coming down the chimney with the arrival of St. Nicholas. The church tamed the people's primal fear of entities coming from the chimney with the figure of a saint who distributes goodness. Thus, the chimney ceased to be a hole through which dangerous spirits seeped and became a magical tunnel where a miracle occurred every year. There's also a shamanic aspect to it, buddy. In some northern tribes, when doors were blocked by snow in winter, shamans would enter houses through the hole in the roof, the chimney. With their red and white clothing and the healing herbs they brought, these shamans actually formed the physical basis of the Santa Claus image. In other words, Santa Claus entering through the chimney isn't a randomly chosen story. It's a result of humanity's way of coping with the sky, spirits, and the isolation that winter brings.
During the harshest days of winter, when all the nature outside turns brown and looks dead, one group of living things stubbornly remains green: coniferous trees. For ancient peoples, this was not just a botanical feature, but a divine miracle. From the Egyptians to the Romans, from the Vikings to the Chinese, many civilizations saw evergreen plants as a promise of immortality, resilience, and the return of spring. So why have we started cutting down these huge trees and placing them right in the middle of our living rooms? The tradition of decorating trees has very deep roots. Ancient Egyptians decorated their homes with palm branches on the winter solstice to celebrate the healing of the sun god Ra. The Romans adorned their temples with green branches during the Saturnalia festival. However, the Christmas tree form as we know it today began to take shape in medieval Germany. In the 16th century, Germans began bringing pine trees, which they called paradise trees, into their homes. Initially, these trees were used in religious plays depicting the story of Adam and Eve, and red apples were hung on them to represent the tree of knowledge. The bright red balls we hang on trees today are actually a modern reflection of those apples from thousands of years ago. Behind this tradition becoming a global phenomenon lies an interesting historical figure: Prince Albert of German descent and his wife, Queen Victoria of England. In 1848, the British royal family was pictured in front of an ornate pine tree, and this image was published in a newspaper. At that time, Queen Victoria was like today's biggest influencer. Whatever she did instantly became fashionable. Following this image, first the British aristocracy, then America and the whole world rushed to have trees in their homes. So the tree we all have in our homes today is actually a marriage of German mysticism and British popular culture. But there's also a spiritual dimension to it, buddy. Although the pine tree, with its triangular form, is used in Christianity to symbolize the Holy Trinity, it actually carries a much older shamanic heritage. In shamanism, the world tree is the central point connecting the underworld, the earth, and the sky. Placing this tree in the center of the house during the darkest time of the year is essentially inviting the universe into its safe space, sanctifying the center of life. The lights placed on it represent the stars and the hope that illuminates the darkness.
Santa Claus soaring through the sky with his 8 or 9 flying reindeer is just a sweet fairy tale element for the modern world. However, anthropologists and historians suggest that the origins of this story lie with the Evenki, an indigenous people of Siberia, and their shamanic rituals. For the shamans living in the vast snows of Siberia, the most sacred plant was the famous Amanita muscaria, bride's mushroom, with its red and white spots. This mushroom was both poisonous and hallucinogenic, and the shamans used it as a key to enter the spirit world. And that's where the connection with reindeer begins. Reindeer also love these mushrooms. In fact, they dig them up from under the snow in winter, and after eating them, they get high just like humans, exhibiting strange behaviors and being unable to stay still. Knowing that consuming these mushrooms directly was dangerous, the shamans would watch the reindeer. When deer eat the mushroom, their bodies filter the poison, but the hallucinogenic effect passes into their urine. Shamans would drink this urine and enter a state of flying. In this trance, the shaman would feel their soul leaving their body and flying through the sky with the deer. So Santa's flying reindeer are actually a metaphor for a shamanic trance experience thousands of years old.
The visual similarities are also surprising, buddy. The Amanita muscaria mushroom is red and white. Shamans often wore red garments with white fur stripes to honor the colors of this sacred mushroom during winter solstice ceremonies. Even when the snow completely blocked the door in winter, shamans would enter through a hole in the roof, the chimney, to dry the mushrooms they had collected, hanging them on pine trees, another origin of Christmas tree decorations. A figure dressed in red and white, entering through a chimney, accompanied by reindeer, bringing gifts, healing, and prophecy to people. Sound familiar? According to this theory, Santa Claus is actually a cosmic shaman. The flying reindeer symbolize not a physical movement, but an elevation of consciousness. These ceremonies, held on the night of December 21st, allowed the community to escape the dark and depressing atmosphere of winter, giving them spiritual joy. The modern world has tamed this mystical and hallucinatory ritual over time, removing the mushroom and trance within and replacing them with toys and candy. But the colors and the soaring of those reindeer in the sky remain as silent memories of those ancient, wisdom-filled nights of Siberia.
If we were to start counting Santa's reindeer, we'd go Dasher, Dancer, Prancer. But the most famous member of this squad, Rudolph, with his light bulb-like nose, wasn't actually part of that ancient army of reindeer. Rudolph was created in 1939 by Robert L. May, a copywriter for the Montgomery Ward department store chain in America. But behind this character lay not just a sales strategy, but a deep sadness from May's own life and a love story he wrote for his daughter. Robert L. May was struggling with economic difficulties at the time, and his wife was battling cancer. When his 4-year-old daughter, Barbara, asked why her mother wasn't like other mothers, May wanted to show her that being different can actually be a blessing. And so, Rudolph was born. That bright red nose, mocked, ostracized, and considered wrong by the other reindeer, was the only thing that would save the world by illuminating Santa's path on a foggy Christmas night. With this story, May not only gave his daughter hope, but also, unknowingly, created one of history's most popular winter characters.
When the story first emerged, company executives were skeptical. They didn't think red nose was suitable for Christmas because it was associated with alcoholism at the time. However, Robert's friend, illustrator Denver Gillen, drew Rudolph so sweetly and shyly that 2.4 million copies of the booklet were distributed in stores during Christmas 1939, and a phenomenon was born. Rudolph's fate also brought light to May's family. May, having acquired the copyright, paid off her debts and secured her daughter's future. So Rudolph not only brought Santa's sleigh out of the dark, but also the life of its creator. The secret to Rudolph's success was that he touched upon that feeling of exclusion that every person experiences at some point in their life. He became the purest proof that a characteristic seen as a flaw can be transformed into a superpower at the right time and in the right place. When the song was made in 1949, Rudolph had moved beyond being just an advertising figure and officially entered the legend as Christmas's 9th reindeer. The light shining at the very top of the Christmas tree today is, in a way, a reflection of Rudolph's bold and distinctive nose.
Those green plants with red fruits that come to mind when it comes to Christmas were actually the most sacred relics of the Druids, Celtic priests thousands of years before Christianity. In those freezing gray days when everything died in winter and the trees were bare, the green mistletoe hanging on the branches of the trees was a miracle descended from the sky for the Druids. Because mistletoe does not take root in the ground, it hangs in the air, directly above the tree. Therefore, they believed that it was a gift from the gods and that it carried the essence of life. Druids would go into the forest on the winter solstice wearing white clothes and collect this sacred plant with a golden sickle. It was considered bad luck for mistletoe to touch the ground, because if it touched the ground, its magic would disappear. This plant was a symbol of peace and fertility. If two enemies met under a mistletoe branch in the forest, they had to lay down their weapons that day and treat each other peacefully until the next day. Today's tradition of people kissing under the mistletoe hung on doorsteps is actually a romanticized continuation of this ancient declaration of peace and love rule.
Those adorable gingerbread men and red and white striped candy canes, staples of Christmas markets and homes, are no ordinary sweets. Each design is shaped by the deep meanings attributed to them throughout history. Gingerbread, in particular, has been seen in Europe for centuries, not just as a food, but as an art form and a religious symbol. When ginger was brought to Europe during the Crusades in the Middle Ages, it was so valuable that its use was only permitted during the most sacred times, such as Christmas. The man shape of gingerbread cookies dates back to Queen Elizabeth I of England. The Queen had cookies made to resemble her important guests who visited her palace. However, as this tradition spread among the people, gingerbread men began to represent vitality and human spirit in the freezing cold of winter. In some regions, these cookies were believed to bring good luck and were hung in homes. Today, gingerbread houses made by children actually symbolize that safe haven in winter, the warmth of family. Let's talk about the famous candy cane. At first glance, it might just look like a candy cane, but its story goes back to 1670 in Cologne Cathedral in Germany. According to legend, the cathedral's choirmaster wanted to silence the noisy children during Christmas celebrations by giving them candy. However, thinking it inappropriate to distribute candy in a church, he curved the candies to form a shepherd's staff.
This both conveyed the message that Jesus was a good shepherd and drew the children's attention to a religious symbol.
The colors on the candy cane also have a hidden language, buddy. The white color symbolizes Jesus' purity. The red stripes represent his blood and sacrifice. Its hard structure represents unwavering faith, and the mint flavor represents herbs considered sacred and healing at the time. So that simple candy we buy from the market today is actually a product of 17th century pedagogical and religious engineering. Until the early 1800s, Christmas in England and many other places was actually a somewhat unruly holiday. There were noisy celebrations in the streets, the doors of the rich were being knocked on by the poor, and it lacked any real familial peace. But everything changed when Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837. Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert, initiated an image revolution, bringing Christmas from the streets into the home, around the fireplace, and into the heart of the family. When Prince Albert introduced the tradition of decorating a Christmas tree, which he brought from his native Germany, to the British court, it caused a sensation throughout the country. When the Illustrated London News published an illustration of the royal family around a decorated tree in 1848, Christmas suddenly took on a modern and stylish character. Christmas was no longer just a religious duty, it had become a sacred domestic ritual where children were at the center, gifts were wrapped, and the family came together.
Another major revolution of this period was Christmas cards. In 1843, Sir Henry Cole, lacking the time to write individual letters to loved ones, printed the first commercial Christmas card. This marked the beginning of the tradition of remembering loved ones far away, a practice that continues to this day. Around the same time, with the development of railroads, people began traveling back to their hometowns for Christmas. The idea of going home became the most emotionally charged aspect of Christmas. Christmas dinners, especially the famous turkey and Christmas pudding, became standardized during this period. However, my friend, the person who truly cemented this compassionate and helpful spirit of Christmas is a literary giant, Charles Dickens. His 1843 book, A Christmas Carol, through the transformation of the miserly Scrooge, proclaimed to the world that Christmas is a holiday of sharing, forgiveness, and kindness. Dickens was so influential that we could say he invented the feeling of that winter miracle of Christmas in words. After that book, people began to help the poor more and show more love to children. The Victorian era transformed Christmas into a nostalgia machine. Since then, we still yearn for the old, snowy, and peaceful Christmases, because that image was created precisely during that period. Queen Victoria's table and Dickens' lines took Christmas from a winter festival into the modern world's day of conscience and family. As we conclude episode 21, we will now look at Santa Claus's final and most brilliant transformation, how he went from a bishop to a global superhero.
Santa Claus has taken on many different guises throughout his journey over thousands of years. Sometimes he was depicted as a weak bishop, sometimes as a forest gnome in brown fur, and sometimes as a winter spirit in a green cloak. But by the beginning of the 20th century, this dispersed image had to be cast into a single mold. That red costume, white beard, toned grandfather figure drawn by a child on paper, even in the remotest corner of the world today, is actually the result of a visual design revolution. In the 1930s, huge global companies and advertising agencies, wanting to keep consumption alive during the winter months, rolled up their sleeves to portray Santa Claus as the favorite neighbor of modern man. In 1931, painter Haddon Sundblom designed the modern Santa Claus that is engraved in our memories today.
While creating this figure, Sundblom created a warmer, more humane and cheerful character, away from religious seriousness. The bright red that was chosen as Santa's clothing color actually represented both energy and liveliness against the gray weather of winter. The great strength of this new image was its standardization. This cheerful grandfather figure entered millions of homes through newspaper ads, giant billboards, and magazine covers. People now began to see him not just as a legendary hero, but as a family friend who could really knock on the door. The red color of the costume, combined with the white beard, created an aesthetic contrast and made this figure instantly noticeable in any environment. Santa Claus was no longer a bishop, but a global messenger of happiness.
This touch of the marketing world secularized the legend of Santa Claus. In other words, he took it out of the monopoly of one belief group and turned it into a popular culture icon that everyone can sympathize with, regardless of their language, religion, or culture. Santa Claus's famous ho-ho-ho smile, the toys in his bag, and his red outfit went down in history as one of the most successful visual design operations of the 20th century. A legend has become a common heritage of the modern world through the lens of the advertising world. Every December in Turkey, a clash of identities occurs. On one side are those decorating Christmas trees and cooking turkeys. On the other are those saying celebrating New Year's is not part of our culture. At the heart of this polarization lies the intertwining of two distinct concepts, Christmas and New Year's. But in reality, the story of this land is deep enough to surprise both sides of this debate. First, let's clarify the technical distinction. Christmas is a religious holiday celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, and it falls on December 25th. New Year's Day is the change of the calendar on the night of December 31st. In Turkey, we are actually celebrating a modern transition to the new year, not a Western religious holiday. However, because the symbols we use, Santa Claus, the Christmas tree, and gift-giving, are borrowed from Christmas, a Christmas celebration without Christmas emerges. This situation triggers a cultural defense mechanism in a segment of society.
The most ironic part is this. Santa Claus, or Saint Nicholas, who is excluded as a foreigner in these discussions, is actually a son of these lands. He is from Demre, Antalya. He is a symbol of goodness and sharing that emerged from the heart of Anatolia. We became alienated from a value produced by our own geography when we imported it from Europe. We began to see our own people in our own land as a cultural threat. Then there's the other side of the coin, Nardugan. According to many researchers, especially names like Muazzez İlmiye, the tradition of decorating a pine tree actually comes from Nardugan, the ancient Turks' rebirth festival. It is said that since the Hun Turks, the Akçam tree has been decorated on the winter solstice, gifts are placed under it, and the victory of the sun over darkness is celebrated. If this theory is correct, we are not actually imitating the West, we are reliving our own tradition, which we gave to the West thousands of years ago in a modern form. This debate in Turkey is not simply a matter of celebration, it's a reflection of the different answers given to the question, who are we? One side prioritizes integration into the modern world, while the other prioritizes preserving its core values. Yet history shows us that Santa Claus, the Christmas tree, and the spirit of sharing all belong to the dusty and rich history of these lands. To make our heritage a subject of debate instead of cherishing it is perhaps the saddest part of the Christmas legend. In conclusion, the abundance of the pomegranate cut on New Year's Eve in Turkey and the joy of the decorated tree are actually a synthesis of thousands of years of Anatolian tradition.
What we call Santa Claus or Winter Festival is not the invention of a single person or brand. It is the faith that humanity, struggling to survive in the freezing darkness, will rise again. It is a vast human legacy, stretching from Odin's stormy skies to St. Nicholas's hidden gold purses, from shamans flying reindeer to Dickens's pangs of conscience. Throughout human history, the names have changed: Odin, Sinterklaas, Father Frost, or Santa Claus, but the essence remains the same. Humans need to cling to one another during the darkest and coldest time of the year. The green of the Christmas tree represents immortality, the lights symbolize hope, and the gifts given represent the sanctity of sharing. In essence, at the end of each year, we celebrate not just a calendar change, but the victory of the human heart against darkness. Today, the Santa Claus figure may be criticized for evolving into a commercial enterprise, a tool of consumerism. This is partly true. However, the essence remains the same. When we arrive, we see that everywhere in the world a child believes in a miracle coming down the chimney, or an adult desires to do a good deed for a complete stranger. This pure feeling, selfless kindness, which the modern world tries to make us forget, keeps that feeling alive. Santa Claus is, in fact, the name of that child within all of us who never grows up, who believes in miracles and wants to share. At the end of this journey, let's remember this: Santa Claus's real home is neither the North Pole nor an advertising agency's office. His home is the hand extended to those in need, the sparkle in a child's eyes, and most importantly, the tradition of tolerance and generosity of these lands, of Anatolia. If the spirit of that bishop who set out from the warm sands of Patara continues to warm our hearts on icy winter nights today, it is not because of the reality of the story, but because of the immortality of the values it represents. No matter how dark the night, no matter how harsh the winter, there is always a light, a gift, and hope. The spirit of Christmas is, in essence, a promise from one human to another. You are not alone. Spring will surely come. In 1840s England, Christmas was a faded, almost forgotten tradition. The harsh working conditions and economic hardships brought about by the Industrial Revolution had alienated people from joy. It was at this time, in 1843, that a writer named Charles Dickens changed the course of history with a book he wrote in just 6 weeks, A Christmas Carol. This book became one of the most powerful works to reconstruct the modern meaning of Christmas. The story's protagonist, Ebenezer Scrooge, is a stingy and hard-hearted businessman who hates Christmas, exclaiming, "Oh, how ridiculous! Bah, humbug!" However, one Christmas night, he is visited by the ghosts of the past, present, and future. This journey melts the ice in Scrooge's heart. When Scrooge awakens, he is no longer someone who celebrates only one day, but a man who lives with generosity and compassion every day of the year. With this character, Dickens sent the world this message: it's never too late to change. So how did Scrooge save Christmas? At that time, the wealthy viewed helping the poor as a burden. Through Scrooge's transformation, Dickens reminded us that Christmas is actually a time for sharing and forgiveness. The book had such a profound impact that readers made record-breaking donations to the poor that year, and workplaces began giving their employees Christmas holidays. In fact, the term Christmas spirit entered the literary world precisely because of this book.
Thanks to Dickens, Christmas ceased to be merely a religious ceremony and transformed into a social responsibility and a family celebration. The snowy, warm, turkey-feasted, and happy Christmas image we see in films today largely originated from Dickens' lines. Scrooge represents the selfish and cold side within us all. His transformation symbolizes our hope for self-renewal at the end of each year. We've discussed how Christmas and New Year traditions have roots going back thousands of years, but sometimes a tradition can be created in just a few decades with a brilliant marketing strategy. The most extreme example of this occurred in Japan, a country where Christmas celebrations were virtually non-existent. Today, in Japan, Christmas Eve means eating fried chicken in special buckets, with millions of people making reservations months in advance. So how did a Western dish become the national Christmas tradition of an entire country? It all started in the early 1970s. Foreigners living in Japan, unable to find traditional turkey for Christmas, began eating breaded fried chicken as an alternative. The local manager of a famous chicken restaurant chain noticed this and launched a massive campaign in 1974 called Chicken at Christmas, Kurisumasu Niwa Chicken. At that time, the Japanese public knew very little about Christmas. Marketers, seeing this gap, packaged and presented Christmas as a happy family day with fried chicken.
This strategy was so successful that even the Santa Claus figure became associated with the iconic founder of this restaurant chain, that grandfather in the white suit and glasses. Today, Christmas in Japan is less of a religious holiday and more of a cultural phenomenon, with people queuing long lines to eat these special dishes and statues in front of the restaurants dressed in Santa Claus costumes. This is the greatest proof of how traditions can be built from scratch in the modern world, not only through legends, but also through the power of advertising. While we count down to December 31st, millions of people around the world are preparing for different new beginnings according to their own ancient calendars. Because measuring time isn't just about numbers, it's also about the stars, the moon, and the cycle of agriculture. The most magnificent example of this is the Chinese New Year, Spring Festival. Determined by the lunar calendar, this date generally falls between the end of January and the middle of February. It's not just a calendar change, it's a celebration of fireworks to ward off evil spirits, the monster Nyan, lucky red envelopes, and an animal representing each year, dragon, tiger, rabbit, etc. For billions of people, the true New Year is the moment nature awakens.
Then there's Nowruz, the heart of our geography in Central Asia. Extending from Iranian mythology to the Turkic world, this celebration takes place on March 21st, the equinox, when day and night are equal. Nowruz isn't just a random day on the calendar, it's the day nature itself says, "I'm back." People jump over fires, haft sin feasts are prepared, and it is believed that the soul awakens along with the earth. This is the most astronomically realistic New Year's Day. In Jewish culture, Rosh Hashanah, or New Year, is celebrated. Usually falling in September or October, this celebration, unlike others, has a sense of reckoning. People eat apples with honey, wishing for a sweet new year, and awaken their souls by playing the shofar, a musical instrument made from a ram's horn. For them, New Year's Day is less about fun and more about inner cleansing and seeking forgiveness. All these different calendars teach us this: wherever humanity lives, whatever language they speak, they inevitably need a reset button. Some of us want to hear the words, "Everything will begin again," as we bid farewell to winter, welcome spring, or as the harvest ends. So January 1st is just one option. What is truly celebrated is the endless, magnificent cycle of time. New Year's or Christmas table is not just a luxurious meal. It is a common prayer that the family comes together for abundance and abundance.
However, the leading actors of that table have gone through very interesting changes over time. Turkey, the queen of the tables today, actually joined this team much later. In medieval Europe, the centerpiece of festive tables was usually a wild boar's head or a peacock. Especially the peacock was brought to the table with its feathers, which was a sign of status. However, Turkey, which came to Europe with the discovery of the American continent in the 16th century, changed everything. King Henry VIII of England. It is said that Henry was one of the first monarchs to eat turkey. The reason why turkey was preferred was purely efficiency. A cow or sheep was very valuable for livestock. However, a single large turkey could feed an entire family and prevent the farmer from sacrificing his other animals. Thus, turkey became the celebratory food of the people.
There is also the issue of the famous Christmas pudding, or plum pudding. This dessert, which used to contain 13 different ingredients to symbolize Jesus and the 12 apostles, was actually a kind of game of chance. A silver coin was hidden inside the pudding, and it was believed that whoever found that coin would be very rich and lucky in the new year. This tradition still continues as a fun ritual in many homes today. What about our lands? The rich appetizer varieties and fruit plates that come to mind when talking about the New Year's table in Turkey are actually a winter reflection of Anatolia's hospitality culture. Turkey's place in our country is entirely a result of the cultural bond established with the West. However, those nuts and fruits on the table, especially the pomegranate symbolizing abundance, have been a way of saying, let's not see poverty in this geography since ancient times. This evolution in the kitchen shows us this. No matter what we eat, what we actually share at that table is the feeling of gratitude. It is not the size of the table, but the unity of those around it that makes that meal sacred. That hot meal shared on the longest night of winter is the taste of humanity's joy of survival that has been going on for thousands of years.
For thousands of years, humankind celebrated New Year's by looking up at the stars. But today, there are people living among those stars. For astronauts on the International Space Station, ISS, celebrating New Year's is far more complex and fascinating than anything on Earth. Imagine you're moving at 28,000 kilometers per hour and you see 16 sunrises and sunsets in a single day. So when will you shout Happy New Year? To avoid time confusion in space, the ISS operates on London-based Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. This means that astronauts consider the new year to have begun when the clock strikes midnight in London. However, because the station is multinational, American astronauts can also have small celebrations according to Houston time and Russian cosmonauts according to Moscow time. This means you have the chance to celebrate the new year more than once in space. And what about those famous feasts? Because there's no gravity in space, popping champagne or butchering a turkey isn't really possible. Astronauts generally share special Christmas meals, such as dried fruit, chicken with special sauces, in vacuum-sealed packages by throwing them to each other. One of their biggest fun activities is decorating the station. Of course, lighting candles is forbidden due to the risk of fire, so they use LED lights and paper Christmas trees that float in the air. Some astronauts even wear Santa hats and send celebratory messages to Earth by doing somersaults in zero gravity. Why is it that for thousands of years, despite changes in names, religions, states, and calendars, we persistently count down at the end of each day, hug each other, and say everything will be better? Because humankind is inherently programmed to hope. Psychologically, the idea of a new beginning is a cleansing mechanism for our souls. We need to leave behind the mistakes, weariness, and disappointments of the past year, feeling as if we are opening a clean slate. This is a chance for our brains to reset themselves. It's no coincidence that we celebrate this during the darkest, coldest time of winter, knowing that the light, the sun, will return even in the deepest darkness is the energy for human survival. All those figures we've seen throughout history, Odin distributing gifts, St. Nicholas bringing joy to children, Scrooge saving the spirit of Christmas, and even that cheerful figure in a red costume in the modern world, they all represent one thing: the continuity of goodness. We are not just celebrating a calendar change, we celebrate the fact that sharing, compassion, and hope are still alive. The branches of the Christmas tree are actually the invisible bonds that connect us to one another. At the end of this vast journey, we understand this. The new year is not just a change of numbers. The new year is an excuse to end grudges, an opportunity to say "I love you" to someone you love, and most importantly, the courage to tell yourself you can try again. Humanity has been performing this ritual for thousands of years because we know that when we sing together, share our bread at the table, and share in a child's dream, the world becomes a more livable place. This is the essence of this story, from the Ice Age to the space station. No matter how long the darkness lasts, the sun will surely rise again. And while we wait for that sunrise, we will continue to hold each other's hands.